Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to another episode of the Banterflix Movie Review Show here on NVTV. Let's see what movies we'll be looking at tonight. We'll be reviewing Vengeance, which is out in cinemas now. Our pick of the streams is Blonde, which is available to watch on Netflix. And we'll wrap up with our DVD of the week, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is being re-released to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary. So that's what we've lined up for you this week, and joining me here in the NVTV studio is not one, but two Alexander. Why did I put myself through this for years? But I'm joined by local cosplayer, Joanne Alexander.
Hi, Jim.
Joanne, we've had you on the show many a time, but this week we're joined, in his own words, by your long-suffering brother, Graham.
I'd like to say hello to all my cat friends out there.
That's okay. Great to have you on the show, Graham. Good to have you back, Joanne. And I think we will not waste any much time. Let's get stuck in and have a look at some movie news.
Be among peers who understand you. Maybe you'll even make some friends.
Want to take a stab at being social? I do like stabbing.
So that's a look at the trailer for Wednesday. It's going to be released on Netflix next month and caught my attention. I'm a huge Tim Burton fan. I love him as a filmmaker. He has produced some films that over the years, particularly when I was young, have definitely influenced my love of cinema. So I'm intrigued to see him back working with the Addams Family. I'm intrigued to what this will be because Tim Burton hasn't really had a big hit for a while. I'm trying to think of the last really great Tim Burton. I mean, we had Dumbo, which is part of the needless Disney, decision to go make another go back through their live action catalogue. This looks like him back in familiar grounds. And I'm intrigued by it. But what about you, Joanne?
Yeah, I actually quite like the idea that he's pulled on the source material, the original source material, the cartoons. That's why Gomez looks the way he does. And he's not tall and suave like Raul Julia had been. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting take, actually, compared to what has gone before. I know that had actually got an awful lot of criticism when some of the early photographs had been released. For some reason, people obviously didn't know possibly what the subject, or the source material rather, had been, and so that they were doing it in comparison to Tim Burton's previous films. But I think it'll be quite good. There does seem to be this absolute love of setting things in schools. I mean, we had Sabrina the Teenage Witch that became quite satanic, which was great. She had moved into a school, and it was a boarding school, and there was all sorts of adventures there. And it does strike me as somewhat similar. I know there's a murder mystery aspect to this, but yeah, I'll be glad to see this.
Maybe that's just what Netflix specialise in, because they did Sabrina, we had Stranger Things, which was kind of a school, so maybe it's just their niche and they're working it. Graham, before we came on air, there was something that has caught your attention in the world of cinema that you were busting to talk about.
Yeah, apparently on the news recently they're talking about Tom Cruise's a possible next film. He'll be filming in outer space on the International Space Station.
Okay, and has this caught your attention? Are you a Tom Cruise fan?
Not really, to be honest. In all honesty, I just wonder where else they can send him. Seems to be the guy's ego's just so big.
Oh well, look.
This must be the final frontier for him.
Look, I love Tom Cruise. I'm intrigued to see how he's going to run in space. I don't think that's possible, but why not? If they can do Fast and Furious, if they can send the Fast and Furious into space, why not send Tom Cruise? Joanne, you're a Tom Cruise fan. I don't think we've ever really chatted about Tom Cruise.
Not really. I quite liked him in Interview with the Vampire. I thought he was very good at Lestat. I haven't really watched an awful lot of his movies later on because he's somebody that I think his personality goes before him, as Graham alluded to, and it can be quite hard to not watch something and think, this is Tom Cruise starring in a Tom Cruise production, music by Tom Cruise and everything else by Tom Cruise, so I generally don't watch his movies. So I'm fascinated to see what he'll do in space and whether he'll be physically fit for it as well.
Look, I've seen him in Top Gun Maverick. I'm 40 this year. He's in his 60s, I believe. He's in good shape for his 60s, better than I'm for my 40s, but let's not compare myself with Tom Cruise. I'm always a little bit taller than him, but let's not pull on that thread. Joanne, you'd mentioned Interview with the Vampire. There's something that's caught your attention as well?
Yep, AMC, who had done Walking Dead, they've got the rights to the Anne Rice books. Now, I'm a huge vampire lover, and I loved the original books as well. but apparently they're only sort of being used as an inspiration. Now, I think some of the characters will be there, but I don't think the storylines are going to be the same. Reading an article today, they said that they thought perhaps some of it had been maybe slightly problematic in its time. I know some of the storylines to do with slavery in the first one as well, in Interview with the Vampire. So I think it's maybe trying to possibly bring it up to the modern day and see it through the lens of modern audiences as well. So I'm really quite fascinated to see what this is going to be like, though I'm hearing kind of mixed reports about it. I think some people have seen it, but I'll still be watching it anyway.
Okay, well look, we'll have to wait and see what our thoughts are in the series. A lot of things, you're talking about vampires, we will be coming back to that later on in the show. But with that, I think we'll move on and have a look at what's in cinemas now.
Evelyn just didn't die, she was murdered.
What?
And the two of us are going to avenge her death.
So, as like a personal boundary, I don't avenge deaths. But here's what I can do. I'm gonna record everything that you think happened to Abilene. And we'll put it on a podcast, and we'll see where it leads.
What evidence does he have that it was a murder?
Nothing.
So that's a look at Vengeance. It's out in cinemas now, and Graham, I'm going to come to you first. So we have BJ Novak. People will know, primarily I assume, from The American Office. He's a journalist. He's searching for a podcast. Like so many people, he's into his crime podcasts. He finally gets the story. He has a former fling, a one-night stand, who's died, and now he's been brought back and finds himself that things are not all what they seem in Texas. What did you think?
That was a very good film, actually, and it probably showed a lot more depth than I thought it would have. I'm a fan of his work he did on The Office. And at times, whenever I thought the film was going to fall into like the usual formula, it had the odd surprise for me.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this. I will come back to the fact we got to see this on a screener. Okay, so I will come back to that. I watched this on my laptop. I know that here in Northern Ireland it is getting a limited release. I believe it's in Omniplex cinemas. Other cinemas are of course available, and I kind of wish I'd seen this on the big screen, because I always talk about this. It's that sense that when you go to the cinema, you've paid your ticket, you give yourself over, and you're forced to concentrate. I think the fact that I watch this at home, even if I do claim to call myself a film critic, when you're at home, you're watching something on a laptop, things still can distract you. I still enjoyed this a hell of a lot. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think there's anything overtly amazing about it. It's very much a festival film. In my eyes, it's the type of film I would watch at a festival, recommend, and probably never hear of ever again. We were talking earlier on about streaming services with Wednesday and other things that were available. I feel that this film's home would be on a streaming service, if I'm brutally honest, but I'm glad to see that it is getting theatrically released. I think it's solid. It's not the Coens' Blood Simple. You know, it's not on that par. It's channeling that kind of vibe. It's great to see Ashton Kutcher back, albeit in a limited role. I liked it, but didn't love it. Where are you going to weigh in, Joanne? I
would call this a wee film. Do you know what I mean? It was that's a nice wee film, because it was an enjoyable wee film, but I thought there wasn't going to be an awful lot of depth in it. Now, yes, there was surprises towards the end, and I was genuinely shocked, but it is quite stuffed with modern sort of obsessions, podcasts, true crime podcasts, people, the hookup culture, all those sorts of things, and everything seemed to be stuffed into the movie. And whereas I enjoyed it because I can see that reference, I understand that reference, I'm wondering, will it date itself because of these aspects? But I did think the performances were very good. I really got to like the family, actually, and it was one of those big guy in the country sort of movies that has been done quite a lot before, but I thought it handled it reasonably well. I'm not sure whether I would have appreciated it though in the cinema. I think it was too small for a cinema, if you know what I mean, you know, in terms of how the actual film was.
There's interesting things I'd love to kind of unpack on that, and I know we are pushed for time. I know where you're coming from, and I guess now, post-COVID and the rise of streaming services, it's the idea of what we think of is worth a trip to the cinema. What is worth our £6, £7, £8 now? And hey, don't forget, we're in a cost of living crisis. We were talking earlier on about Tom Cruise. Top Gun Maverick definitely showed that was a film that had to be seen on the big screen. It was shot with IMAX cameras. It looked amazing on the big screen with the best sound system. This film, Vengeance, I could easily watch at home. But I guess my point in a backhanded kind of way, I wish I had seen it in the cinema though, to give myself its full concentration, where you're left to go, right, I can't pause this after 10 minutes, I can't put on another episode of The Simpsons, no, I'm not going to watch another episode of Bob's Burgers, I've set myself down, I've paid my money, I'm going to sit and watch this now for what, an hour and 48 minutes, I think, in around that time. I guess I agree with you completely, but it's that sense, I think this film deserves to be seen on the big screen, but where will it find its audience? Probably online. I believe in the States, I think it's streaming on Peacock. It is available. But then, in the world that we live in, will it get overlooked? Is there too much choice out there? Coming back, Graham, Joanne and I went off on a little tangent there. Your kind of thoughts on that? You watched this like us on a screener. Do you wish you'd seen this in the big screen? Would you feel shortchanged if you'd paid your cinema ticket?
I agree. I think ideally it would be best to watch it through a streaming service. Yeah, it's getting to that stage now where you're thinking, is it worth it to go to the cinema to pay that sort of money? And it wouldn't be maybe the particular subject matter. It wouldn't be an attention grabber for me primarily.
I want to come back just because you mentioned that you were aware of BJ Novak's work as a writer, and I think he's a producer as well on The American Office. This is him directing. I don't know if he's directed a feature before. I think he's definitely done a few shorts. He might have done some TV. From a directing point of view, what do you think of it as a piece of film?
Yeah, I think it's serviceable. I think it's a good enough effort. I believe when he was on The Office, he started off as a writer, and eventually they coaxed him into starring. And as one of the characters, the office clerk.
Yeah, he's the temp. He's the temp.
Sorry,
and you know what? I would like to see where he goes. So often, we find writer-directors or actors getting behind the screen. It only happens once or twice. Yes, we get the freak of natures like Clint Eastwood, who manages to forge a career behind the camera. But there's the likes of Bradley Cooper, who, well, to date, has only moved behind the camera once. So I want to see more of what BJ Novak does. I know he can write. I've seen his work from a writing point of view. So yeah, I mean, it's not a glowing recommendation from me. It's serviceable. It's a 3-star meh, but as Empire Film Magazine says, a 3-star is still a recommendation. And it'll be interesting to see if maybe either of you have it as your film of the week. I've already let the cat out of the bag. It might not be mine. But with that, let's move on to our pick of the streams.
I know you're supposed to get used to it.
And we all lose our charms in the end.
But I just can't.
Square cut or pear-shaped, these
I've played Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. I can't face doing another scene with Marilyn Monroe.
So that's a look at Blonde. It's available now on Netflix. Joanne, I'm going to come to you first. What did you think of this? And I think we have to be quite clear. It's not really a biopic. It's been missold, I think, by marketing men and women who we know, viewers, will sell their souls to get you to watch a project, right? We know that. But I think if the honest truth is this is not a biopic about Marilyn Monroe. I think we also should say at this point that this is a film that deals with potentially triggering issues. There's no way of getting around that. And I would say it right from the get-go. We may at some point mention in this interview, we can't avoid it, that this film will deal with domestic abuse, physical abuse. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. And I think we'll say that right from the get-go and we'll not be flippant about those issues. But what did you think of Blonde, Joanne?
Wow, this was a harrowing 3 hours. It really was. I don't even know, I feel like I don't even know where to start with this movie because it throws you in the deep end immediately. There is the child abuse, which is very triggering, I would imagine, for people. I just feel maybe that I don't know whether Netflix had actually put up, usually they have a warning, and I think it should have been in 50-foot capitals, warning, the following subjects could be, will be mentioned within this. She was nearly killed by her mother, and then we go on to see the abuse that she suffered when she was trying out, for her very first movie. And it just struck me as 3 hours of watching a woman take as much physical and mental abuse as is possible. I thought it was quite misogynist. I thought it was very anti-abortion, and considering what's going on in America at the moment with Roe versus Wade, I thought the timing of it was particularly bad. The handling of what a fetus is at that particular stage. I know it's supposed to be all in her head and it's imaginary, but I found it quite offensive, and you know, it wasn't particularly educational that way of what a woman actually does go through. So I was disturbed greatly by it. I think it plays more like a horror movie. It's not a biopic. And it might have actually been easier to watch in some ways if they hadn't said it was Marilyn Monroe. Because as you alluded to, it's not Marilyn Monroe. I mean, there's nothing there about how she set up her own production company and how she was actually quite a strong individual. I know apparently she's quite difficult to work with, but this is basically a woman going insane for 3 hours until her unfortunate death, which isn't even done properly. I know apparently it was shot in the hotel room, but the actual story itself wasn't correct. So no, I'm not a big fan of it, but I think the cinematography was extremely clever.
There's a lot of things I agree with you. In a twisted, strange, bizarre way, I do actually really like this film. I genuinely do. I will also say it's a film that I found harrowing, tough to watch, everything that you've alluded to, Joanne, everything you've not alluded, you've said clear as day. I think there's things there though that I think from a visual point of view, as you've mentioned, are stunning. The performance, I mean, Ana de Armas is absolutely fantastic as Marilyn Monroe. And also Norma Jean, because that's an important thing about this film. We've already mentioned the source material it's based on is a book that is largely, the writer has said, is a work of fiction. The film, when it was sold by Netflix, was sold as a biopic. And we think of the Marilyn Monroe biopic, we probably think of something like, I think it's My Week with Marilyn, which was out a good few years ago. That would definitely be a lot safer, a lot easier to watch, and much more of a straight film. There's something about it, in a weird, twisted way, I admire in what it's trying to do. I can get what you're saying about its misogyny, but I also think it's trying its best to kind of paint the picture of the misogyny of the time. And you've pipped me, Joanne, because I was going to say this film would be much more, I feel this film would be much more acceptable if it wasn't Marilyn Monroe. If it was an actress that didn't exist in the real world. And yes, it does borrow heavily from the horror genre. I love the horror genre, so I can see what it's trying to do. There was a film out a few years ago called Starry Eyes, which did a similar idea in this idea about what women have to go through to get ahead within the film industry. That was an outright horror film, and it was easier to watch than this. It's tough. It's not an enjoyable film to sit through, but in a weird way, there's things I really admire. And the thing I think, if I had to kind of put my finger on it, it's that sense of that disconnect between the idea of Marilyn Monroe, the concept of Marilyn Monroe, the actor that we see on the screen, and Norma Jean. And this film, as we've already mentioned, and I'm repeating myself, I apologise, that sense that it's not painting the picture of either of those two people, because it is based on a work of fiction. But there is a sequence in this feature where we see Norma Jean watching herself on the screen, and she does not recognise the person that she sees. And she says, "That's not me." And we've talked about it, we're all adults. There is the reference, there is sequences that deal with abortion. That sequence references that. And I don't want to talk too much about it because people want to watch the film. Well, maybe you don't want to watch the film after listening to this. But there's things I sit back and admire. I am a fan of this director. I mean, he directed Chopper. He directed The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. I absolutely adore that film in particular. It's another near 3-hour feature. I don't love this as much, but there's things I can sit back and admire about it. But if you're coming to this expecting a biopic about Marilyn Monroe or to know anything more about her, you will not find that here. I've rambled on quite a bit, Graham. What's your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, it is a difficult film even to review. I must admit, the first time I heard about this, I had some friends mentioning that it was a biography, which a lot of people have made that mistake. It's certainly not. It was certainly a difficult one to review, even Googling it to see what the initial reactions to reviews of it were. It was off-putting. But in some ways, in a sadistic type of way, I was glad I did actually watch it. There was the cinematography. I actually did love some of it, especially the waterfall transition. I thought that was very well filmed. It was quite interesting. But it only paints Marilyn as a victim throughout it. And I would have liked to see other sides to her. I liked the bit where she fought back whenever the studio phoned up wanting Marilyn Monroe that day, and she told them politely where to go. I would have liked to see more of that, more sides to her of that, while sometimes it did feel maybe a wee bit one-dimensional. But I thought Ana de Armas, she was brilliant. She brought her A game to it.
Yeah, she was absolutely outstanding in this. And funny, I was reading an interview with the director where they had to go back and work on her accent because it just wasn't right, because Marilyn Monroe has that distinctive voice, and they had to work at it. And I think they even did a lot more even in post to go back and refine it after test screenings. You know, Joanne, on that, I think there's things you like about the film, but I think there's also things you find very off-putting. And I think we're all in the same boat here, the three of us, when we talk about Blonde. But let's look at the centre performance. I think it's outstanding. I genuinely think she's great in this role as Marilyn Monroe. We think of Michelle Williams. I mentioned earlier on, I think it's My Week with Marilyn, or One Week with Marilyn. Apologies, viewers, if I don't get the name quite right. That felt like much more of an impression. Yes, there's moments in this film where Ana de Armas is doing an impression of Marilyn Monroe, but I think we get enough of Norma Jean in there as well. But coming back to what Graham said, we do see Marilyn Monroe in this and her portrayal as the victim, and I would like to see more of that, a rounded character. But what did you think of the centre performance?
I thought it was extremely good. Yes, it was top class, and as Graham said, she brought her A game to this. I wasn't sure at first whether she really was portraying Marilyn, and then I watched a couple of snippets and looked at some photographs of Marilyn and thought, yeah, you really have nailed this woman very well. And she nailed the absolute horror. Now, how she wasn't herself impacted in some way by the scenes that she was portraying. It was quite graphic in many ways. There's a lot of nudity for her, and she handles it extremely well. But oh, I would love to see this woman in something that wasn't maybe just as difficult. But I mean, I suppose that's how you make your acting chops, by doing things that are not the norm. And you know, she's probably learned a lot from this, because she was extremely good.
Well, you could always watch her in Knives Out. Why not watch her in that? Yeah, I think she's a fantastic performer. I haven't seen her in a bad film. She kicks ass in the last Bond film, her sequence in Cuba. I don't know, I mean, a lot of people are already talking Oscar talk. I don't know. I think the film itself has too much baggage that I don't know if that's going to happen. We think last year around this time we had Lady Gaga in House of Gucci, and that was going to be seen as a shoe-in for an Oscar win, and in the end it wasn't even nominated. So I don't know what way things will roll out. I think it's a mixed bag for us. It's a complicated film to unpack, and we're probably not doing its full justice in the limited time we have, but we are going to have to move on. We are going to have to move on and wrap up this week's show with our DVD of the week. So that's Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's been re-released on DVD and Blu-ray to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary. It was out in 1992. That makes me feel horribly old. I was 10 back then, and I think I might have sneaked in or somehow got to see this film, because I have a very vivid memory of watching this film when I was probably far too young to really be seeing it. But it's been re-released, as we say. It's out now in the shiny new 4K re-release. We'll not talk too much about Keanu Reeves' accent, but Graham, let's come to you first. Are you a fan of this film?
I actually remember back in the day going to see this in the cinema, and I remember the build up to it. I did enjoy it. I must admit, I find maybe the theme of love never dies rather tiresome, but I loved the horror in it, especially the start where Vlad Tepes, he's on the battlefield. He's got the bat armor. I thought that was fantastic, and the splashes of the red horizon, the Hammer horror style music overture to it. I absolutely loved that. And I believe even the costumes were designed by, I'm going to forget now, it's a Japanese costume designer who also worked on one of my favourite underappreciated films, Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters.
Okay, it's a good film. I have seen that. I'm intrigued. I'm going to come back because you mentioned when you went to see this when you were younger, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you how old you were, right? Obviously, if you were in the cinema, you were old enough because it was an 18.
I was old enough.
Right? You said at the time you find it a bit off-putting about the fact this film is essentially, it's a horror film, but it's also a love story. Now we're all supposed adults in the room. Does the theme of love work more for you now than it did when you went to see this in the cinema?
Probably not. I still love the one thing that impressed me about rewatching it recently was the practical effects haven't aged at all, which is amazing. Because if you compare it to other films back in the 1990s that would have went for, say, CGI, they would have aged horribly by now.
It's very true. Practical effects will never die, much like Dracula himself. Well, he does, but we'll not talk about that. I adore this film. I do, and I actually love the fact that it's a love story front and center that just happens to be a horror movie as well. The style of it, the over-the-top nature of it, the hamminess of some of the performances. We have Anthony Hopkins on a 15 out of 10, maybe even a 20 out of 10 in terms of going over the top as Van Helsing. We have Keanu Reeves' accent, Winona Ryder's accent. We also have Sadie Frost in there as well. And in front and centre of all of it, we have this absolutely captivating performance from Gary Oldman. And when you think about Gary Oldman's Dracula in this, he goes through not just one form, but there's 3 or 4 different iterations of Dracula that we see, and they're all him, and he's just fantastic in that role. And what I love about this film now, and I know I'm gushing, and you can probably guess where I'm going to go with my film of the week, in the sense that we think of Dracula, a lot of people will think of Christopher Lee in a cape. But I think now we look at Dracula and we've seen the BBC version that was out a few years ago, we can see how Coppola's film has influenced the portrayals we've seen since of Dracula. For positive or negative, it has had an effect. It's a masterclass in set design, costume design, as you've mentioned, Graham. It's flawed, and there's times I watch it and I kind of find myself hiding behind the sofa, not because of anything gory, but just for the hammy nature of what's happening on screen. But it's 2 hours, and it's just 2 hours of just pure cinematic excess. I love Francis Ford Coppola as a filmmaker. Yes, by this stage, he was slightly burnt out. We have the post-apocalypse now Coppola, not the filmmaking force that made The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation. But that's enough of me rambling. I've rambled a lot today, Joanne. I apologise. Now's your chance. What did you think of the film?
I don't think it's aged particularly well.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the acting's very hammy, as you say. Anthony Hopkins is he actually portrays quite a cruel character. Whenever you watch it, sometimes he's almost as evil as Dracula. He's totally insensitive to what's actually going on with Lucy. I sort of enjoyed it still because I enjoyed the Hammer horror references, because there's definitely, you could see the influence coming through there. I actually think the film picked up greatly, and I would have preferred to have seen more when they went onto the continent to start chasing Dracula. That was more exciting actually to me, because I'd forgotten how much of a lead up that there was actually to that moment in the film. So that's where it really took off for me, and I think actually Winona Ryder got better from there on in as well, which kind of surprised me because she was a bit wishy-washy before that. It was okay.
Okay. I get a sense of a 3-star cinematic meh from you.
Yeah, I just did, what happened was, it was Graham and I actually went to see it, and we remember, of course, the dog scene. wolf, whatever you want to call it. And there is a lot. I mean, we talked about nudity in Marilyn and the Marilyn Monroe biopic. There's a fair amount in this too. Not that I'm objecting to that at all. But I think sometimes they use that to sell the film. So I do. But it's okay. I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't as good as I remembered.
Well, sex sells, Joanne. That's all we
sure
can
does.
say. So look, I mean, we're out of time. So I think what we will do, we will wrap up this week's show with our film of the week. Okay, so we're at the end of the show. We've talked about 3 very different films that we have very mixed feelings about. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go with this. Last week it was Shooin' for our film of the week. Graham, I'm going to come to you first. What's your film of the week? Of the 3 films we've talked about, what are you going to recommend our viewers seek out over the weekend?
That's a difficult one. I think though, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to go for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Because I was a fan of Gary Oldman's acting. It's pretty good, I guess, Dracula film for Hollywood standards. I mean, my favourite vampire film would be Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. I think that one's certainly the better one.
Okay, we will have to get you on when we talk about that film. So you're going to go for Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'll not say which one I'm going to go for. Viewers know which way I'm going to go. But Joanne, what's your film of the week and why?
Believe it or not, it's Dracula. Now, that's surprising. I think it might have been Blonde if it hadn't gone just as far as it did and it hadn't featured Marilyn Monroe, if it had been a different actress. That might have been something that would have been quite good actually in a miniseries, I think, to expand on some of the themes that were actually within that. So because it was in that 3 hours of harrowingness, I'm going to have to go for Dracula, even though it wasn't bad.
Okay, I feel like I maybe peer pressured you both into this. I'm going to go with Bram Stoker's Dracula as well, just because I love the over-the-top nature of it. And right now, the fact that the world's a bit of a depressing place, 2 hours, just pure escapism, and just sit back and enjoy Keanu Reeves' attempt at an English accent. What's not to love there? So our film of the week this week is Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that allows me then to shamelessly mention that, of course, we are screening it at the Dark Hedges International Film Festival at the Belfast Barge. We're going to have your friend Gabrielle Ridio.
Yep.
She's going to be down cosplaying for us in the night, and we will have a print for people if they pre-book their tickets. So what is not to like about that? Check out our website for more details. But that's enough me shamelessly plugging our wares. I think all I've got time to do now is to thank my guests here in the studio. So thank you very much, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.